And joining me now to talk about it is the founder and the president of WIL, Attorney Rick Esenberg. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Jay. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. And you'll be filing a petition with the Wisconsin Election Commission today regarding what? What are you doing?
Well, it's regarding something which is called ballot harvesting. And ballot harvesting refers to a situation where when voters are casting their ballot by absentee ballot, third parties become involved, sometimes in actually submitting the application for the absentee ballot, but always in collecting the ballots and then delivering them to the polling place. And the problem with this should be obvious. The people that are likely to do this are partisans, and this creates a possibility that if somebody is a Democratic operative or Republican operative, they may place pressure on the voter. They may alter the ballot. They may refuse to return the ballots of individuals who they feel that are voted for the wrong candidate. And this has led to problems in a number of states around the country that either permit it or where it's happened. So, for example, famously in California in 2018, it looks like the Republicans were ahead in a number of congressional races on election eve, and these margins just sort of withered away in the days that followed the election as these harvested ballots came in. In North Carolina, where ballot harvesting is formally illegal, there were Republican operatives who did it anyway. And this caused the election to be invalidated, and there were allegations that these ballot harvesters had altered the ballots, that they had voted for candidates and in races where the voters had not cast a ballot, that they had not returned ballots for people that if they thought that the votes had been cast for the wrong candidate. And so this type of thing is ripe with the potential for abuse.
Yep. You just have these hundreds of thousands of ballots that are floating around in unsecured elections, and then you have these people that under this ballot harvesting law can pretty much anyone could return an absentee or a mail-in ballot to a polling place on behalf of other people. And as you say, it's just rife for fraud and rife for these sorts of hijinks. Even if I'm your neighbor and I'm ballot harvesting and I'll drop off your ballot for you, and I know that you're a liberal and I'm a conservative, well, I just drop it in the wastebasket instead. I mean, it's led to voter fraud, as you said. So you're going to ask the Wisconsin Election Commission for a clarification. Is this allowed in Wisconsin today?
Because Wisconsin law itself doesn't directly address the question. It seems to be written in a way that assumes that the voter would be the one who requests the absentee ballot, and the voter would be the one who has to return it, either by putting it in the mail or taking it to the polling place. But it doesn't say so explicitly. And so the Wisconsin Election Commission has the ability to make rules clarifying what the law actually means. And we have asked the commission, or we will be asking the commission, to clarify Wisconsin law and say, look, this is not the way it works. We're not going to have absentee ballots requested by or returned by partisan operatives. We do expect the voter to request and return his or her own ballot, which can be done very simply. It can be done by mail. It can be done by stopping by the polling place during a relatively lengthy early voting period that we have. I mean, it's not an unreasonable expectation, and I think it's one that's important to ensure that we have we not only that our elections are conducted fairly, but that we have confidence that they've been conducted fairly.
Right, and this is an important action today because it's something that needs to be clarified before we all vote. It should be clarified. It should be clarified before we have activist groups engaging in ballot harvesting in October, or parties scrambling around to file lawsuits that either allow it or stop it right before Election Day. This is a smart thing to ask for the clarification now.
Yeah, and here's the thing that we want to emphasize, Jay. This is not a partisan move. We often hear when we're talking about ballot security and efforts to prevent voter fraud, I mean, the typical response is, well, there is no voter fraud, no one cheats, or more accurately, there might be, but it's not a lot. But we had an election overturned, right? The 9th District congressional election in North Carolina in 2018 was overturned over allegations of ballot harvesting. And it wasn't the Democrats who did it. It was the Republicans who did it. And so, voter fraud can be a bipartisan sin, and it ought to be a bipartisan objective for us to reduce the possibility when we can.
We're talking here with Rick Esenberg of the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty, which is going to ask officially, petition the Wisconsin Election Commission for a clarification as to whether ballot harvesting will be allowed in Wisconsin in fall and under what conditions. And just to clarify, this isn't an official court action or legal action or anything. It's a request for clarification. Could it lead to a court action?
Sure, because what could happen is, it could lead either way. If the commission were to decide to agree with us, grant our petition, and adopt a rule that made clear that this type of activity is not permitted, somebody could go to court and they could challenge that. They could say that that's an improper interpretation of the law or make other legal challenges. If the commission does not agree with us, then the question becomes, well, since you didn't clarify the law, what does the law really say? Does it permit this or not? And that could lead to litigation and challenges if election officials decide that they're going to allow partisan operatives to drop off ballots.
I think some people would say, well, you can ask, but that doesn't mean the Election Commission has to give you an answer. They sort of do, don't they, to an official inquiry like this?
Well, they have to act, but again, it's you can ask, but the answer may be no, or the answer can be that we can't decide, because remember, the Election Commission is consists of 3 Democratic and 3 Republican commissioners. I don't think they should view this as a partisan issue. I think this is something that everybody should be able to agree on. But in our world today, that doesn't happen very often. And we have seen the Election Commission split 3-3 between the Republicans and the Democrats before and be unable to act. They did that with respect to the, our litigation involving, efforts to maintain accurate voter rolls, and it could happen here as well. I hope it doesn't, but it could.
Well, I want to ask you about that other case as well, but you suggest in this instance with ballot harvesting, the state statute is vague, correct?
Well,
because it really isn't in the other instance.
I think that it's not in the other instance. That's right. Here, I would not want to say it's vague. I want to say that it's not as clear as it should be. Okay. I would read it. I think that the common sense reading, I think the correct reading is that it's the voter who requests the ballot, and it's the voter who must return the ballot. But it doesn't explicitly address that issue. It assumes it. And so I think that given the fact that some people have said that this is permitted in Wisconsin, some people have said that the law is unclear, a clarification is important.
I think that's a good move. And in the other case, the Wisconsin Supreme Court has decided it's being described as a second swing at this case. It's really the first swing at this case because there was a lawsuit that your group filed over about 225,000 bad addresses that the Wisconsin Election Commission refuses to take off of our voter rolls. Apparently that's been narrowed down to about 150,000 bad addresses now. But the Wisconsin Supreme Court initially declined to hear the case on a 3-3 tie. Hear it early. Now Justice Kelly's election is over. We have a 7-member court again, and they've agreed to hear it. Why is this lawsuit still so critical in your mind?
Well, I mean, I think it's more critical than it was at the time that we filed it because we didn't know at the time that we filed it that there was going to be a coronavirus pandemic and that people were going to be much more likely to cast their ballots by mail. There is a lot of reason to think that will still be the case in November. And so, we had 75% of Wisconsin voters cast their ballot by absentee means in the April election. And when that happens, we've got the situation where persons can request ballots, they can cast ballots without having any personal contact with election officials. And they can do that based on the fact that they are registered to vote. And although there are certain security measures, when you first request an absentee ballot, you have to provide a copy of a photo ID, and the election officials, at least in theory, can match signatures. It's a somewhat less secure system. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have it. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't permit people to vote by mail and vote absentee. But it does mean that it heightens the need for us to have accurate voter rolls, so we don't have hundreds of thousands of ballots which are basically out there, not under the control of anyone, possibly, if our rule petition is not successful, being harvested by partisan operatives. It just makes it more important that our voter rolls are accurate.
Absolutely.
And so that's why the case is important. This isn't the second swing at the case. We made an effort to get the court to take it up in an unusual way. We asked the court to take it up more rapidly than it otherwise would. And most of the time, a court is going to say no to that because, we have processes in place and courts are willing to, there are rules that permit courts to move more quickly when they have to, but they're not going to do that in most cases. And so this really is just the normal operation of the case. We were successful in the circuit court. We were unsuccessful in the Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court has agreed to take the case. Yeah. The Supreme Court doesn't take more than maybe 1% to 3% of the cases that it's asked to take. They're taking this one, and it'll be argued and hopefully decided prior to the fall election.
Well, and the left-wing activists, of course, want to insist that this is a politically driven move that would disenfranchise voters, but it is a simple and basic yet huge question facing the court. Do state agencies like the Wisconsin Election Commission need to follow the laws that our elected officials have put in place? Because in this instance, we have a clear process for purging, for cleaning up our voter rolls. So is there any wiggle room in this statute that would give us reason to worry that this is...
Look, I don't think so. Look, you have to register to vote. And because we vote by geographic district, you have to register at the place that is your primary residence. If you've moved, your registration is no longer valid, and you have to re-register. State law says that election officials must, if they receive information from the voter, and remember, this is not some type of algorithm, or this is not some type of we suspect that you moved. The only way that you can be on this list and identified as a mover is if you submit information to the government indicating that you live at another address. Then what happens is the law says that election officials are supposed to send a notice saying, look, we have information that indicates that you've moved. If that's we're going to deactivate your registration and you have to re-register where you live now. But if we're wrong, return this postcard and we'll change and we'll keep your registration as it is. You can re-register to vote when you go to get an absentee ballot. You can re-register when you engage in early voting, or you can re-register at the polls on election day if it turns out that the government was wrong. But we know the government isn't wrong. We know that this mover list is 95 to 98% accurate. And so this is a really modest and should be an uncontroversial effort to keep the voter rolls accurate. It's not a partisan move. There's no reason to believe that people who might be inaccurately identified as movers are more likely to vote Republican or more likely to vote Democrat. No one knows that. And so I think that the argument that the commission is making is that somehow it's the municipal board of electors that are supposed to do this and not them, but that's never happened, and the municipal board of electors don't maintain the voter rolls. We just think that's an argument that doesn't work, and so hopefully the court will see it our way and enforce the law in the coming November elections.
Thanks for your time this morning. I really appreciate it, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
It is Rick Esenberg from the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty. He is a former Marquette professor. He's the president and the founder of this group that's just grown over the years and takes on more and more of these very important cases. And this is an important move. As much as anything, we have a Wisconsin Election Commission that doesn't seem to want to decide much of anything until they're under the gun. This is an important move because, in a way, it will smoke them out on this issue of ballot harvesting. Is it going to be allowed? is it not going to be allowed? The statute would suggest, as it's written, it isn't allowed. But this is the folks at Will saying, we'd like a clarification before everyone votes in November. Let's head off the problems now and get a clarification on this. Ballot harvesting is illegal in Wisconsin. Important move they make today. And you heard it first here on WISN.